I'm Fred Rosero. I work at Oblong, mostly in the Millerton store. Just a little bit of housekeeping up front. We're going to start after I introduce Lindsey with a little talk from Jessica Sarantonio from Destination Dutchess. And then we're going to move into conversation about your fabulous new book, Out on the Road. So, Lindsey is a queer freelancer and writer of fiction and essays whose writing has appeared in AFAR, Fodor's Condé Nast Traveler, Longreads, Eater, and more. We're here to talk about their first book, Out on the Road, which just published this Tuesday. It's a culmination of your work as an LGBTQ travel expert, through which you empower queer travelers to understand and advocate for their needs and plan incredible adventures while feeling seen, heard, and supported. You're also the founder of the LGBTQ travel blog, Queer Adventures. So first of all, congratulations on the publication of your book, and I'm going to hand it over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Fred. Hello, folks.
Hello.
I love the playback. That's great. All right, so it is a pleasure to be here at Oblong Books in Rhinebeck to celebrate the release of Lindsey's book, Out on the Road, The Radical Joy of Queer Travel. Happens to be during National Travel and Tourism Week. This is a time when the tourism industry recognizes the essential role travel plays in empowering our economy, strengthening our communities, and connecting with people across the country. We see this impact right here in our community. In 2024 alone, visitors to Dutchess County spent an average of $2.2 million a day and supported over 10,000 jobs. They also contributed $98 million in local and state taxes, which was then used to improve our quality of life by funding things we all want, like safe roads, bridges, parks, preserving open space, emergency services, mental health and youth programming, and more. So I'm here on behalf of Destination Dutchess, the officially designated destination marketing organization for Dutchess County. We work with partners like Oblong Books, as well as restaurants, attractions, cultural organizations, to promote the region to visitors from across the nation and around the world. We are honored to be a part of today's event, which highlights the importance of inclusive travel, ensuring that everyone, not just some, feels welcomed and has a positive experience while traveling through our county. It is through meaningful connections with people and places that visitors build lasting memories and are inspired to come back. We are grateful for the opportunity to learn from Lindsey's research and personal experiences on the radical joy of queer travel, and to continue advancing a more inclusive and welcoming destination for all. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Jessica. And just a little more housekeeping. We have books for sale up front, and we're going to do some signing at the end. We'll save a few minutes for Q&A right before that. So, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. You wanted to read, I think, from the book, and then we're just going to jump in and
we're
talk
going to
about
have
it.
a fun conversation. But yeah, there's so many really fun personal stories in the book, and so I wanted to give you all just a flavor of that before we get into the conversation. So this is from a chapter called The Life-Changing Magic of a Thai Island. From Bangkok, Eliza and I traveled south to Krabi. We found the coastal beach town a bit too commercial for our taste, stayed the night, then hopped the morning ferry to Koh Lanta. We had first heard about the island from the travel blogger Nomadic Matt, who called it a rustic paradise. We rented a scooter to explore the island. I'd never driven a scooter, nor had I driven on the left side of the road. Like so much else over the course of that first week in Thailand, I was determined to figure it out. I cast a silent prayer toward the sky and took a practice spin around the block. Then we zipped off to explore, stopping by a street market for a roadside lunch. Vendors hawked fruit shakes and grilled chicken skewers basted with spicy peanut sauce. They sold fresh pineapple attached to the stalk, peanut crepes stuffed with sweet or savory filling, and mounds of dried chili and fresh squid. After a lunch of papaya shakes and Nutella-stuffed crepes, we set off down the island's main road. Unlike other Thai islands, which had been overdeveloped in a tourism free-for-all, Koh Lanta still felt natural. Sure, there were supermarkets and medical clinics and even a couple of luxury resorts, But there were far more local businesses using hand-painted signs to advertise, in English and Thai, to backpackers like us. That's how we found Khao Mai Cow Cave. We had gone riding around looking for the cave, which Lonely Planet warned could be tricky to find, when a sign showed us the way. The cave had been discovered 40 years earlier. A local family managed it, constructing bridges over rock pools and offering guided tours. We hiked up a muddy waterfall bed, through a jungle humming with cicadas, to the cave entrance, chatting with travelers from Russia and South Africa about their time on the island. The trail wound up and up until it stopped abruptly at a rock face. Our guide handed out hard hats and headlamps, then gestured at a hole in the rock where a bamboo ladder vanished into darkness. One by one we descended. The interior of the cave was dense and chilly, a welcome contrast from the strong sun. We passed through several rooms connected by bamboo bridges and rope ladders. Some sections were so narrow we had to squeeze through, getting mud on our skin and clothes. In the final room, bats perched on the ceiling. I stifled a scream as they dropped from their perch and swooped through the cave before slipping out through small cracks in the rock. By the time we exited and hiked back down the waterfall, it was nearly dark. We ate dinner at a family-run seafood restaurant around the corner from our hotel. The food was delicious: fish and garlic sauce, vegetable noodle salad, and 2 large singhas to wash it all down. We'd been on the island for less than 12 hours, but had to agree with Matt. This was paradise. I couldn't identify what made Koh Lanta special, but I knew how it made me feel: vibrant, enthusiastic, relaxed, and open. I wasn't parked at a desk, I was being active and learning new things. Anxious thoughts bubbled up now and then, but the volume and frequency of those thoughts decreased with each passing day. The brighter future I'd wished for less than a week earlier was here, in Koh Lanta. I'm the sort of person who wants to see around the bend and over the mountain, even if the view is more of the same, so I hated the idea of leaving without having seen the entire. On our last day, we drove around Koh Lanta in the opposite direction. When we passed a sign for Acha Chai House, I hit the brakes. The chai house was adorable, an open-air bungalow with floor cushions tucked behind a canopy of vines. It felt like sitting in a treehouse. We ordered chai lattes and settled in on silk cushions. The shop's proprietor, a Japanese man, had studied acting in New York. How he had wound up on Koh Lanta making chai and looking after his landlord's kid was a mystery. 2 other Americans joined us. We got to chatting the way you sometimes do while traveling, where shared nationality creates an opening. Far from home, it seems easier to open up. We skipped the small talk and wound up in deep conversation about what we wanted from life. They had taken a volunteer vacation at the elephant sanctuary in Chiang Rai and were backpacking around for a couple weeks before returning to Brooklyn. It's cliché to claim that a Thai island vacation was life-changing, but in our case it was. Eliza and I connected with other travelers and each other, felt close to nature, and nourished our bodies with daily exercise and healthy food. We could have been doing those things anywhere, but we hadn't been doing them back in Boston, where connecting with nature or queer community meant choosing between an hour on the T or sitting in gridlock with aggressive drivers. I felt myself becoming one of them, leaning on the horn and yelling vitriol, revving the engine to weave between lanes. Koh Lanta reminded us there was another option. The brief time we spent there let us live it. 3 months after leaving Koh Lanta, we moved to the Hudson Valley, hoping the rural pace of life would mimic the calm and serenity we'd experienced in Koh Lanta. 11 years later, we're still here.
Thank you. That whole passage really speaks to one of my first questions, which is, what's so special about travel that's made it something so essential to the entire way you live your life? I mean, the book is full of stories like this, but also all sorts of excursions, short, long, skipping and jumping through the world and local spots. What is it that hooked you, and what makes it something that you continue to come back to?
Yeah, so I've always just been a really curious person, and I think travel is one of the ways that I've indulged that curiosity. The other main one is books and reading, and using that as a bored kid growing up in the suburbs as just like a portal into worlds.
And so travel for me does that same thing, but in the physical, tangible realm, where, you know, you get to explore new places, and sometimes those are places really close to home. And sometimes they're places that are very far away. And just having those adventures, seeing new things, for me is so energizing.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about what your life was like before travel and the kind of dead-end job you were stuck in, and it really seems like this was something that just was a radical world shift for you. So something that I've heard when I talk to people who travel, something I've experienced as well, is that when people travel and encounter strangers, those strangers are usually kind, they're usually willing to help out, or at the very least not paying that much attention to you. But overwhelmingly, the narrative around queer travel is about danger and staying safe. And that's really important to keep in mind, and you cover safety extensively in the book. But can you speak to the importance of being open to that unexpected kindness, to being accepted in the world in maybe places you wouldn't expect to?
Yeah, and I think, like, one thing that's super important to keep in mind about this question right now is, you know, just what's going on in the US is creating a lot of anxiety, not just for queer people, but for any American traveling overseas. They're suddenly feeling vulnerable and exposed and under attack because they don't like what our country is doing or policies that are being passed, and they're getting pushback from them. So I think it's important, you know, especially for queer people, but all of us, to really just remember, like, yes, bad things can happen, but they're probably going to be rare, and most people are going to be kind and welcoming and curious and excited. And so just keeping that in mind, I think, is really helpful to to give you that little bit of courage that you need to, whether it's like ask for wayfinding information, ask for directions, or just get to know somebody, initiate a conversation, be there for those little exchanges and moments that really create that connection that makes the world feel like a smaller place.
Yeah, you do talk a lot about connection in the book, and you also discuss travel within the U.S. and how you can feel just as alienated within your own country, especially now. And how have you navigated that when you give people advice about travel internationally versus nationally these days?
I mean, I think the bulk of advice I give, no matter where people are going, is sort of two different things. Number one is I have people think about where they want to go. I think so often we're just told where we should go, and that's based on the laws and whether we're accepted there. And so if we think first about where we want to go, you know, we can prepare for those trips that are going to be a little more challenging, where we might need to hide, where we don't have the same acceptance and comfort, you know, and sadly that's even places in our own country these days. But it gives us back some more of that power, right? Like, we give it away when we stick with these safe places and when we say, I'm only going to go to these super affirming places.
Yeah, it does seem a lot like keeping a balance of openness but preparedness too, and I really enjoy in the book how you keep all of those things in mind. And one of the things that I thought was really special about this book was that throughout it you talk about just continuing to try. If something doesn't work out the way you want it to or expect it to the first time, what can you adjust? What can you try again? Maybe you learn that something isn't for you, but what else is there? And it speaks to your curiosity about the world that you extend that to other people who might want to learn better ways to travel.
Yeah, and I think that's something where people who travel infrequently approach travel with a lot of trepidation. And my mom is one of these people. So we took a big trip together last year, and I actually went to visit her to help her pack. And we went to REI to make sure she had everything she needed. And then we went home and we packed it in the suitcase. And the funny part of this is that we got to our destination and she did not have half of those things. And all of a sudden she was like, I don't have that. I need to borrow your charger. Yeah, and I was like, but Mom. But yeah, when you travel more often, you just learn kind of what happens, and you learn how to deal with it, and you learn how to adapt, and that travels over into daily life.
So for your mom and other people who are a little anxious, do you see that transformation happening, like from the trepidation and I don't know, this is a little too much for me, I don't know if I can handle this, to actually going and doing it, and what kind of results do you see? How do people talk about it afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, on the practical level, I think there's like, oh, I needed these 7 things. I'm going to go make sure that I have them for next time I travel. And on more of like the transformational level, I think having a big adventure is so life-affirming in so many ways. And especially for marginalized people and queer people, we need that. We're operating at such a joy deficit that having those big adventures and also even having acceptance, right? And acceptance can look a lot of different ways. And sometimes it's just like not being hassled, right? Like being allowed to just exist, not being bothered, not being scrutinized is sometimes just like, oh, God, so relaxing.
Yeah, so there is a lot of talk about, you know, the dangers of traveling, but you also mention in the book that often travel is from a place that is less accepting to a place that's more accepting, you know, especially when it's someone in the U.S. and they're not super comfortable in their home space, but how travel can be a way to have a clean slate and try new things in a place where people don't know you and you're not going to be judged in the same way. Have you experienced that yourself?
I have, but I think there's a story that I share in the book that's actually even more touching in this way. And so when I wrote Out on the Road, I wanted to interview other people with other identities that I don't have, who had challenges that I don't have. And so one of the interviews that I conducted was with a gay South Asian man named Naveen. And so we were chatting about all of the different anxieties and pressures that Naveen feels as part of the gay community, where there's such an idealized body type, and anyone who doesn't have that body type gets so much pushback constantly. You know, and so I hear this from my gay friends, and so it was, you know, I had some contacts chatting with him about it. But we were talking about his trip to Berlin, which is such a more open-minded and accepting place around bodies and nudities and different types of bodies, where there's just not the same like rigid, thin body preference that is pervasive in the US. And so for Naveen to go into Berlin and to go into these environments and feel like this culture was more permissive was such a healing break for him, to shift his thinking around that body culture in the US and to come home from that and say, I was able to just be so casual because I was a tourist and I knew that I'd be gone in a couple of days and I could just try on these different ways of thinking and being and feel that and like pattern that in my nervous system, and then go home and continue to work with these beliefs that I don't want to have anymore, that I know aren't good for me, but doing that work to change it is very hard. And so for him, travel was a real literal way for him to like repattern himself from that.
And you do talk about, in other contexts, and that one, cultural differences and norms. One of the things that you mention is that gender norms and what's considered queer-coded and what's acceptable for PDAs, public displays of affection, is different from culture to culture. Have you ever been surprised, pleasantly or otherwise, about those different cultural differences where you came in with your own cultural norms and found something totally different?
Yeah, all the time. One example, I think, happened in Japan 2 or 3 years ago, where we were going to travel around and spend some time in onsens, which are the Japanese hot springs, for anyone not familiar. And those are divided by binary gender. Like, there is a possible non-binary onsen, but it's like a private onsen where you have it only to yourself. So I was really nervous to go into these spaces. I really wasn't sure if I was going to get questions or if they were going to try to prevent me from accessing the space. And I just had a lot of anxiety in general around that, like, cultural, traditional femininity and how it was going to feel to be there. And like, I felt it in my body, I felt it in my mind during probably the whole first week that we were there. But once I started to interact and have these experiences, and I realized, like, no, it's fine. Like, everyone's fine. Like, everyone's polite. Nobody's questioning me. Like, these things that I was so worried about are just such a non-issue. And from that point on, I could really just relax and enjoy. And like, it was one of my favorite things about going to Japan.
You talk about how queer joy is an inside job, and I think that's part of what you're talking about here. The process of like expanding your views of the world. Can you talk a little bit about strategies for finding that queer joy within travel, within yourself, and what the process of discovering that for yourself was like?
Yeah, so I think for me, it started with a mindset shift where, as a young queer person, I very much felt like queer joy was somewhere specific out there, or that there were like specific cultural practices, right? Like if I go to the gay club, then I'm participating in queer joy because queer joy is at the gay club, right? It's out there. So, like I eventually realized, like, yes, and, right? Like, yes, queer joy is in the gay club, obviously. Queer joy is at gay pride, obviously. But it's also, like, anywhere that I feel affirmed and seen and celebrated, you know, not just for being a person, but a queer person. And so that I get to choose, like, what queer joy means and where it is and where it isn't. And that can be loud and community-oriented and celebratory, or it can be, like, a really quiet and domestic form of queer joy. And so I think, you know, the advice I'd give for cultivating that would be to kind of have that self-reflection, like, what brings you joy, what affirms you in your queerness, and, like, you know, I'm a list-oriented person, so I like to write it down, like, literally make a checklist and write it down. And then you can kind of have that to refer back to anytime you need a joy boost, like, oh, these are the things that really bring me joy, and where can I find this in the place that I'm visiting or, like, around me.
Well, and that speaks to how, obviously, as queer people, we're all individual, and queerness is not what defines us, but the narratives about us are very inflexible at times. And you talk a lot about how that broader flattening of queerness and of people in general really impacts people's assumptions when it comes to queer people and when it comes to traveling as well. I think one of the things about this book that's really special is the nuance. You take a lot of care with this book, and you talk a lot about differences between experiences when you're a traveler and when you're a local, where people are traveling in and out. One of the quotes I loved was your chapter about passing, but it says, "I do not want my safety to rest on someone else's oppression." And that speaks to something you mentioned throughout the book, this double standard that's often present in the locations we travel to, the treatment of queer tourists, which is sometimes accepted and allowed because the money is coming from them, versus the treatment of queer locals. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about. So as a traveler, like, I never want to have special treatment that somebody else doesn't have, but automatically if I'm going into somewhere, you know, where it's illegal to be gay, or, you know, maybe it's not illegal, but other local people don't have the same rights that I have, well, for me, that's very frustrating. And it's hard to really enjoy myself and to also know, like, I'm getting all of these special exemptions, right, that other people don't have. And so I think one thing that feels really small but is tangible that we can do in those moments where we're traveling and we know that we're benefiting from this privilege that we never asked for and don't want, but at the same time we can't, like, opt out of it, is to find ways to give back as much as we can, whether that's giving financially directly to people, supporting businesses they may own, or finding organizations that serve that community that we can donate to.
You mentioned a lot of research into the culture and finding queer places that already exist and trying to support them, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and let me just add, like,
Yeah.
there's procedures and tips and tools and, like, all kinds of resource lists
Yes.
on how you can do this. So if you want to dive deeper with that.
And, you know, things change quickly throughout the travel world and the world in general. And a lot of these resources, like, while they're in print now, and the book itself will not change. When you follow them and learn the strategies, it helps empower you to be able to change the way you research and what you need to prepare for each time. Is that something that took a while for you to cultivate?
Like, yes and no. Like, I had been keeping this big spreadsheet of resources and articles and things like that while I worked on the book proposal. And so when it came time to write the book, I had like a big database of like 50 or 60 links. Yeah. So I was able to rely on that for a lot of this information.
What about when you were becoming a traveler yourself? Did you kind of build that skill set as you went, or were you very prepared from the outset?
I was not very prepared from the outset. I would say it was a very iterative approach where like there were certain things I did right away, and then it would more be like as a response to like, oh, it really would have been nice to connect with the local queer community, or like, hey, I would like to connect with the local queer community, but not just have to go to the gay bar. Like, what else is there? And figuring out for myself, before we had apps, like everywhere is queer, like, how can I do this? How can I do this?
And there are certain sections in the book, and one story in particular about you finding a gay-themed hotel,
The Golden Banana.
Golden Banana, and expecting safety and acceptance there, and going to find out that it was catered to a very specific subset of queer people, which was
it was
cis-gay.
frustrating. Like I cried.
And you do a lot of traveling with your wife. That was part of this story. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I can share the story for the audience. So it was a very grueling day, let me just say. We were on our honeymoon, which we were traveling basically closeted. And so the whole time, this was maybe like week 3 into a 5-week trip, we were so looking forward to being at this gay-owned hotel. And it was like, oh, and we don't have to hide. We're going to be at a gay hotel. We can just be ourselves. Like, thank God. We start our day in Laos. We're staying on these islands, and we have to take like a canoe back to the mainland, and then get driven to the bus depot, and then get on a bus. And the bus takes us to the Cambodian border, and we have to get off, and we have to go through like border security, but there's all this corruption and grift, and so it's like very frustrating. We just keep getting hit up for money. And then we get on another bus, and we get on another bus. And so like 8 hours later, like we are sweaty, we are tired, we are gross. We finally get to Cambodia, and we get to this gay-owned hotel, and we just walk in, and we're like ready to collapse. And the guy asks us the question that we get asked all the time: would you like 1 bed or 2? Are you kidding? Dude, you're gay. Like.
And I remember in the book you specifically booked 1 bed.
Yeah.
And
we booked
then
1 bed.
Said 1 bed is good, and he said, "Oh well, we have lots of rooms. 2 beds is an option."
Yeah. And so they gave us a room with 1 bed because we insisted, but we could only stay there for 1 night, and then we had to move like somewhere else, and it was just like so heartbreaking for me to like have been looking forward to this for so long and then not be seen.
When you come up against frustrating days and situations like that, what inspires you to keep going and keep trying, and what advice would you have for people who do come up on frustrating situations like that, maybe on their first time trying it? Why should they keep trying?
All right. Well, just to answer quickly, what gives me the inspiration is that, any little sign of progress, however small it seems, really gives me inspiration. So noticing like airlines have kind of switched from using ladies and gentlemen to dear passengers, for example. Like, that's one sign of progress, right? That's not gender greeting. You're still greeting everyone. You can still be polite and normal. Hotels have kind of switched up in some cases the way they ask that question, just to be more like, oh, here's the room I've got you in for this many nights, like, correct. And it feels less like an affront. But yeah, what was the second part of that question?
Oh, what advice for other people who experience that and maybe, don't have a history of great travel experiences to fall back on?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I can recommend would be to think about what might happen so you're not caught so off guard, right? Like for me, that was the first time that had ever happened. And I was just thrown so much, right? That it was like, like I was done for the night, right? I was just crying basically in my room. But to know that that might happen. And so to ask yourself in advance, like, okay, well, if they hit me with this question, what am I going to say? Right? Or if I'm misgendered by the person leading my group tour in front of everyone on the tour, what am I going to say? Maybe I'm going to have a conversation with them ahead of time so that they don't do that. Or like, you know, how am I going to handle these possible situations? And out on the road, there's like all of these questions and prompts for travelers to think through that on their own and to revisit kind of depending on where they're going, depending on how they're feeling, what the laws are in a specific place, so that they kind of go into those situations already prepared and feeling supported.
And you also talk about mental health and wellness in the book and how it's easy to let the what ifs paralyze you and stop you from trying and doing it. And you talk about imagining the good things that can happen, what's the best case scenario, and can you picture that happening? Have you had a point where you were just like so frustrated and so ready to give up, and was there something or someone that helped shift your mindset?
Oh, I think I've gotten better at just like discharging the frustrations and not getting to them the more that I've traveled. So I've learned like what helps me release that. And sometimes it's as simple as just like going for a walk or like venting about it and then being like, okay, we're not going to talk about it anymore. We're going to like go to this museum or this garden or do something that I know is going to bring me joy.
You also talk about accessibility of travel and the wage gap for queer people, and there's an entire chapter and then also tips throughout the book about how making it economically feasible is a possibility. Can you talk about a few of those different strategies for people who might not have a wealth of resources?
Yeah, I mean, let me see. I think first I would say there are some mindset things that people can work with. Like they can really question their assumptions around travel. And sometimes we think like, oh, I have to go to a fancy hotel, or I have to go to, you know, it's winter, I have to go away to the Caribbean or something, or I have to travel in this particular kind of way where it costs a certain amount of money or looks like I see on social media. And, you know, it doesn't have to look that way. It can be cheaper, it can be done on a budget. And in the book, I share kind of this radical budget travel trip that this non-binary person took biking across the U.S. where they had a budget of $300, and rather than save up until they had thousands of dollars to support their bike trip, they were just like, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna camp out and, you know, couch surf and stay for free, and I'm gonna like ask people if I can work for food. And it's unlikely that most people are going to travel as frugally as they did, but I think showing that it is possible is really like eye-opening. And so there are all kinds of practical tips on how you can get accommodation for cheaper, or get started with points and miles if that's not something you use, or even just save a little bit of money on attractions, accommodations, everything like that, so that every dollar goes further.
And early in the book, one of the questions in the back, one of the guides is to decide your travel style. Like one of the things you mentioned is like how risk averse you are versus budget versus like all these different considerations. And how did you build these resources? How did you like come up with the different ways that people experience travel and how to figure that out for yourself?
I think I just thought about what I like to do and the different vibes that I'm going for, and kind of created almost like little personas from there. Like, you know, sometimes I just want to go to a spa and be really fancy, and sometimes I want to go to a city and do all the arts and culture things, and sometimes I want to be laid back. And, you know, from there, just thinking like, okay, if these are sort of the activities that are covered, and I want it to be like a very choose your own adventure quiz, like, what's missing from this, and what can I add that's gonna fill in those gaps.
And there's like an inherent flexibility to your approach towards travel that I think isn't talked about a lot in other travel books or other travel resources. You're all for trying and redoing and adjusting and making it work. And I think that's a very queer thing. And so tying that into a book about queer joy in travel is really important. Are there other gaps you've seen in books about travel when it comes to queer people and the way things are talked about?
Yeah, I mean, the classic way that queer people are talked about in travel books is like in a page at the back of the book. And maybe there'll be that gay hotel that I found. Like I found that in Lonely Planet, or a couple of bars. And that's all there is. And I think one of the frustrating things about that, just to spell it out, is that it assumes that all queer people want the same things. And it does not account for like the diversity in the queer community, or the fact that at a different stage of life, or if you're a queer parent, or if you've gotten sober and you don't want to go to the gay bar anymore, well then they have nothing for you. And so I really wanted my book just to show another way. And so hopefully, like, I hope nothing more than some people in the travel industry pick it up and they're inspired to start talking about LGBTQ travel in a different way than we have.
And for the broader travel industry, I think this is a great guidepost on ways to make it more inclusive. But what are some of the paths that you see for the travel industry as a whole to include queer people and all sorts of diversity in the way it's structured?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to spell out a bit more from what I was talking about, I think, you know, there's so much room to really deeply serve different parts of the community and to think about what people need as a whole, you know, and historically there's maybe lists of LGBTQ businesses, or, you know, if there's a place like New York where there's Stonewall, then that's a historical attraction that they can recognize. But how can they build on that to offer something deeper, right? And also, how can they demonstrate their inclusivity? Like, this is a question that I have, because it takes a lot of work to actually do that due diligence and figure out, like, oh, is this company LGBTQ inclusive? Does this hotel welcome LGBTQ people? Like, you know, just to spell out what that looks like, that might look like going through their Instagram to see if they have photos of same-sex couples, if they have anything on Pride, if they have anything on their website, like diving down the rabbit holes. And I wish I had seen the statistic before I wrote the book, but I just found it last week. Queer people spend 12 extra hours planning every single trip we take because we have to do this research, right? And it's like, you can actually make it easier for us to find this information.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think also just advocacy on an individual level within and without the travel industry. Like, are you talking to your reps? Are you supporting important laws and things that are happening? Are you paying attention? So I think this book is a great book for allies, because it talks a lot about the things that queer people do face when they're traveling and just in their day-to-day lives. And even just a baseline level of awareness is not always there when it comes to people who have those automatic privileges.
Yeah.
And you talk about also different privileges, not just in terms of identity, but like visa privileges, passport privilege, and the different ways people from all parts of the world have to navigate. Something I didn't know going into this was the lists of countries that have more accessibility and you don't need a visa to go. If you're going from the US, there's like over 100 countries. If you're going from another country, you have to apply for a visa almost everywhere you go. How did you get to the point of learning the things that are kind of invisible to us at first when we have these privileges?
Yeah, I think it's just sort of by nature as a freelance travel writer, there's various newsletters that I'm subscribed to, things that I get. So when they put out studies or reports, I get notice of that. And also just being in conversation with people, like one of the sources in my book reminded me about passport privilege because it's not something that I think about, and I should, but, he reminded me that, it's something, this was in the Digital Nomads chapter, just to give context, and he's frustrated when he's seeing all these Americans, playing at expat lives, really being so blind to their privilege. And as a queer person, he was like, I can't turn a blind eye to that. Like, I can't just book the Airbnb when I know that I'm displacing a local person.
Yeah, and gentrification is something that happens everywhere, and
Happens here.
Yes, it does. Right in the Hudson Valley. Being a tourist or being someone who's kind of dipping into a culture, are there like questions you ask yourself ahead of time to be mindful of the people living in that area? Are there practices you have to not support systems that take away housing or different things like that?
I used to be such an Airbnb booster. Like, I loved it. I really felt like it made travel so much more affordable for me, but I've really backed away from staying in Airbnbs when I travel. And when possible, I try to look for an Airbnb, like if I can't avoid it, that seems to be run by a human and not a property management company. And preferably one where it's like maybe an add-on unit in someone's house or like a little cabin in their backyard, like where I'm like, probably nobody would be living here, right? Like, so I'm not taking away somebody else's full-time apartment, right? So that I feel better in that situation.
Yeah. It seems like a whole lot of trial and error and learning as you go, but having that openness to, trying and having things not go right the first time or not doing things right the first time, but still willing to like continually improve and learn and be open is like a really core part of your ethos.
Yeah, and I think just like having that growth mindset of like, oh, this didn't work out the way that I thought it did, but like, what can I learn from that? Not like, this didn't work out the way that I thought, and now I'm never going to Europe again, right? Like, because something terrible happened.
So the joy part is something we've talked a lot about, but there is the safety part as well, which is often one of the biggest barriers to people traveling when they're queer, when they're with their partner, when they are gender non-conforming, as you've experienced. And you talk about one safety strategy being trying to pass as cishet. And you talk about how that's a double-edged sword. It opens you up to experiences you might not have had otherwise, but it's also tucking away a piece of yourself, and that in itself can be a form of violence. So how do you approach using passing as a tool for yourself, and how do you recommend people use it as a tool and pick it up and put it down when they're traveling?
Yeah, I mean, so for me personally, usually when I'm trying to pass, I either feel like that's necessary for my safety or I want ease. So most recently, I had just handed in this manuscript and I was going on this vacation with my mom that I helped her pack for. We were going on a cruise in the Galapagos and we were going to be on a boat with 30 people. And I was like, I don't know who these people are going to be. I don't know how they're going to feel about me. So I had to have a little conversation with my mom and be like, we're just not going to tell them that I'm queer, and we're not going to talk about my wife, and we're just not going to do any of that until we've kind of gotten the lay of the land, and then if we feel like it's safe to do so, then we're going to come out. And so what that did was just buy me the time and also prevented me from possibly being in a really gross situation where I was stuck on a boat with some haters. But for people to think through this on their own, there are so many tools in the book, but what I'd say is like, hey, you don't have to. You never have to. But if you're like, I'm not going to do that, then it's probably best to go to some of those like tried and true LGBTQ welcoming destinations, the kinds of places where like people aren't going to look at you if you're holding hands with your partner or if you're wearing something that's like not what they would expect. Like they're not going to give you weird looks. places that have vibrant queer cultures of their own, like cities that are super queer friendly, like Amsterdam, for example, like places like that. Just go to those places first and build up your comfort, and, you know, indulge your love of travel, and then if you want to kind of push out from there and try something a little more like off of that beaten path, perhaps going with a group is a good idea because it gives you that safety in numbers.
And you do mention in the book lots of websites and places where you can find those places that are rated for human rights or safety for queer people specifically.
Yeah, just to shout out my favorite one for international travel is Equaldex. They rank every country in the world on LGBTQ rights. So like there's a number one.
Can you say that louder?
Equaldex. So they rank every country in the world and they rank them on specific criteria. So if there's a particular law that affects you or is important to you, you can check how they rate that law. And you can also look at, like, what I love is that they have surveys and like local people's attitudes and feelings. And so you can see how things have changed over time.
I think we're getting close, so we're gonna do some Q&A. If you guys have questions, feel free to shout them out or raise your hand. Good.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for all that. To start, just today alone, I was looking at some travel plans and thinking of a couple of places that have been on my mind, two particular ones. One was Turkey, the other was Morocco. So, of course, one of the first things I do, I want to go see what the laws are and if there are LGBTQ protections. And, you know, news to me, you know, some have more protection, some have no protection, some are extremely punishable by law, and the list goes on and on, right? So I was just wondering what your thoughts might be about, you know, for someone who might still have interest in a culture, maybe they don't have, they may not be approved by the law necessarily, but still have interest in culture and exploring culture and actually knowing you're not welcome. You know, I was just wondering what your personal thoughts might be on those kinds of experiences, if you could speak to that at all.
So, like, should you go? Or how do you go and protect your safety?
Both. I'm just wondering both what your thoughts are in both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I personally haven't been yet to any place where my identity is criminalized, but that will be changing soon. So I would say if you really want to go to a place like Morocco where LGBTQ identities are criminalized, like, you can go, but you need to take the time to prepare yourself because nobody else is going to be preparing you but you, right? So what I would do in that situation would probably be to look for a group tour that's going there, so that I know that my safety is sort of outsourced to the guide, and that you're also with other people.
And you also do interview people in the book who have had those experiences, who have gone with their partners to countries where homosexuality is criminalized and sometimes punishable in very scary ways.
Yeah, and I can just share that story too, because you might find that interesting. So in the book, I interview some gay couples that went to Saudi Arabia right after they opened to tourism. And they actually had to, like, sign up on their visa and, like, swear that they were going to follow the laws in Saudi Arabia, which include no consumption of alcohol and no same-sex activity, right? And so they went, and they're like, well, nothing bad happened, but the entire time I was there, I was just really aware of what could happen, right? So it's like, it's going to be an extra weight that you're taking with you on your vacation, but if you really want to have that experience and explore that culture, then it may be worth it.
And yeah, you do talk about priorities in the book, whether visiting this particular place is worth the risk that you may be taking. And that's very obviously on a personal, person-by-person basis. How have you made decisions like that in the past? I know you haven't been to quite that type of country, but...
Yeah. How I make decisions is I think about where I want to go. And I would say the laws come into it, like, at step 3 or 4. Like, it's never the first thing that I'm thinking about. But it is something that I'm thinking about, and it can be a deciding factor. Like, a few years ago, we were going to go away in the winter, and we were like, oh, there's really cheap flights to Jamaica. Well, let me check, is it as bad there as I remember it being? Short answer is yes. We found some really cheap flights to Puerto Rico, which was much better. Yes.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say also you're spending your money in a place. I assume you think about whether you want to be spending your money someplace.
I do. There's a lot of information on ethics in the book, but just to give a short answer on that, like I think we give away our power as travelers a lot, and that we can reclaim some of that. And thinking about like, oh, hey, what are the laws in this place? Does this place support me? Like, no, then why am I supporting it, right? Like, if just what I want is like a nice beach vacation in the winter, like there are so many options that are inclusive, places where I can be myself. Is it really worth it for me to go to one where I can't? So, like, why should I settle, right? And I think we don't think critically as much as we could or should about this.
I wanted to ask if you have had any experience with coming back into the country. Is there anxiety around re-entry into the States?
In general, or more recently since the election?
Oh, more recently.
Okay. Yeah, so yes, I was definitely very nervous about this, but I have global entry, which is different. And I can talk about that if you want.
I mean, I have friends who have
Yeah.
fled the country.
So for those who don't know, global entry gives you kind of like skip the line privileges when you travel. And it is like a concierge level of service. Like it really is. Like it's annoying that it's annoying that not everyone is treated this way. But like from the moment that I got global entry, I was treated like a normal person and not treated with suspicion. In the ways that whenever we're dealing with a border official or we're going through the TSA checkpoint, we're all sort of viewed with suspicion, and that's like extra suspicion, you know, for people who don't fit gender norms, for Black women, they have their hair like scrutinized, and other people. And so joining a program like PreCheck or Global Entry exempts you from all of that, and you're just treated like a normal person, and you're breezed right through. So fortunately, the last time I traveled out of the country, it was still seamless when I re-entered. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I have dual citizenship now with Europe, so it's similar, crossing borders there. But I'm just kind of wondering, with regards to, you know, scrutiny and those kinds of things, nowadays with social media, you know, I understand people scrub their phones and those kinds of things. Is that something that you have consideration about?
Yeah, I have gotten much more careful, and I think taken some apps like Facebook off my phone. I power down my phone when I'm crossing borders. There are a lot of things that you can do, just not to give them access. And I would say that these things are optional. But certainly if you're someone who is visibly gender nonconforming or trans, they might not be optional. They might be something you 100% want to do. And there are checklists on this that go through every possible tip and everything. So it really depends on like how anxious you are about this. And if you're like, I'm just going to turn off my phone and like put it in lockdown mode or something, like that's an easy thing you can do, because they would have to turn it on and get your password to go through it. But if you're really into privacy, there's way more settings that you can like look into.
You talk about a lot of amazing people in the travel industry, a lot of them who have kind of built it up, their businesses or their guidebooks for, just like you have, from experience over time. And I think a lot of those are people that we didn't know, I certainly didn't know were out there. People who are creating experiences and guides with queer people in mind, and going to queer locations, spending their money at places even within maybe a less safe country, but there's queers everywhere is mentioned a lot in your book. And obviously you're very much a part of that space, so you see stuff like that on your social media, on your newsletters a lot. But for people who are not so much entrenched in that space, how do you find those resources, few and far between as they may be, particularly if you have a destination in mind already?
Sure. So if you have a destination in mind and you want to look for, I don't know, say LGBTQ tours or LGBTQ-owned hotels, there are databases that you can use. One of these is run by IGLTA, which is the International Gay and Lesbian Travel Association, I believe. So you can go to their website and you can browse listings in a particular country and you can get ideas from there. There are also other booking engines, like Booking.com has something similar. It's not as easy to use, it's not as browsable, but if you're going to certain cities, they have little curated guides and you can go from there. So those are two options. Also, just Googling will get you some. I always like it, and you can't count on this, but when tourism boards have it on their website, that can be really helpful. And there are some times when they've had super comprehensive web pages that I have been so grateful for, because I'm like, great, you just planned 2 days of my trip with us here.
It's really good to know that those things exist, not in every case, and maybe some are better than others. But yeah, just having the information that you give in this book is very eye-opening.
Could you repeat the website that has that stuff?
IGLTA, IGLTA.org,
And then you also said booking.
and Booking.com.
Has some.
And these are all in the
book.
book. So
That Booking.com is limited in certain ways.
it is limited, yeah.
Maybe that will
But
change.
I want to give them credit
Yeah.
for doing something. Yes.
I have one question. You've spoken a little bit about the radical joy of queer travel and some of the maybe challenges that queer people find that heteronormative people might not. I'm wondering if you thought a little bit about the situations queer people might be open to because of the gifts queer people bring to their lives based on their experience.
I talk a lot about the beautiful creativity and flexibility and boundary breaking abilities of queer people, and sort of the way that we've all had to question everything that we thought we knew as part of our coming out process. And some of us felt firm in our identities and then had to question our identities again, and we realized we weren't who we thought we were. That's certainly been a part of my journey. And so in so many ways there are just beautiful celebrations of queer people, our experiences, the things that we've been through, and the skills that we have to offer that I hope will be really heartening to allies who look at the book.
You talk about so many trips in the book. You've talked about a lot of them tonight. Can you tell me about one that kind of got the bug in you for travel, the thing that made you like, oh, I want to do this again and again and again?
Yeah, when I was 14 years old, I went to Egypt and Israel with my YMCA summer camp. So I was, so wee, and I knew nothing. I really hadn't traveled before that. But it was such a wonderful experience to be exploring these ancient cultures and seeing all of these incredible artifacts, like the pyramids and the great temples at Luxor, and hiking up Masada at sunrise and seeing all of this stuff. 100%, I was like, I'm gonna do this again. And I realized that when I got older, I would have to pay for it myself. Yeah.
I think right now in particular, you mentioned it is a very fraught time for traveling around the world, but I think also when we live in the US and spend all our time thinking about what's happening in the US, we get in this bubble, and there must be a sense of freedom when you get out of that bubble for a little while and see, oh, there's a wider world and things are different. Have you experienced that a good amount?
Yeah, I think when things are really tense geopolitically, sometimes it's just really helpful to go somewhere else and be, a foreigner there, right? And so you maybe know a little bit about what's going on in that culture, but maybe you don't, and that's also okay, and you can just explore as a tourist. And I think sometimes we can also have experiences where things aren't great here, but we can go somewhere else and have a super queer vacation and feel that joy and pride that is maybe a little bit hard to feel at home these days.
I think queer people are a lot more likely to do this, but we've all heard stories of terrible American tourists and how they kind of poison the country they go to against American tourists. Do you have any tips on how to be mindful and not be that person?
How not to be a jerk.
Yeah.
Let me see. I mean, I think one of the gifts of travel is that pre-travel phase of planning where you're going to go and what you're going to see and do, and during that phase learning about the culture. And so just being aware of any cultural norms where you're oh, I normally wear tank tops, but they're kind of a modest culture, and so I should cover my shoulders, right? Just picking up those things that you should be polite as a guest in that person's culture, and even if you wouldn't do that at home, doing that on vacation. I also think just I don't know, right? It's so much more exciting to experience the world and be open and inspired than to want everything to be the same as it is at home and be sad that it's not. And so I think if you can see the opportunities rather than feeling constrained and held back, that's helpful too.
And yeah, as I mentioned, I think queer people are uniquely suited to pushing a little bit out of our comfort zone by not doing the things we're entirely used to at home, and using that kind of as a superpower when we're traveling. All right, I think we are at our time. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Lindsey. We've got books for sale up here, and Lindsey's going to stay and sign.